Hello. All right, and I guess I think you're still slowly letting people in, so I'll just wait another 10 seconds before we get us going. Perfect. Thank you, Anna, for setting us up. Good morning and welcome to the WorkSafe Rate webinar for social services or human services, as someone called it recently. My name is Tigran Bagorich, and I'm the CEO at the Community Social Services Health and Safety Association. I'm excited to have you all with us today as we dive deep into the next year's race with the workers' compensation premiums. Our residential social service group has some of the highest rates in the province across all sectors. And our goal is to build a better understanding on how these rates are determined and how we can collectively reduce them. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few items. This webinar is being recorded, and this webinar will also be posted shortly after this event. I invite all of you to visit our updated website and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't been signed up already. All present will also receive a certificate of attendance after the webinar. And Marianne, please move us to the next slide. As we get started, first of all, I would like to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I would also like to acknowledge that you're joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional caretakers and stewards of these lands and waters. And as we move to the next slide, I would like to introduce you our small team. We're currently 4 members here at the CSSHSA. Joining us on this call is Anna Lucia Mateus, who supports our board and is the original Avenger on the team. We also have Sancha and Therese, who support our psychological health and safety program, and much more. They're our newest superheroes, and we're very thankful to have them with us today. And as we produce to the next slide, I want to just raise awareness that we also have a number of webinars coming up. We're working in partnership with CSSHSA, and collaboratively, we are launching a mental health webinar every single month. The next one coming up is on recognizing burnout and building resilience. And in this webinar, we will have Jeff Mofe from CSSHSA present this interesting hot topic. We're also going to be hosting a first aid webinar together in partnership with WorkSafeBC. And since we have regulatory changes coming in this month, November 1st, we wanted to present what the changes are. And we also have some resources coming up on our website that you'll be able to use to make adjustments to your health and safety programs. We're also open to ideas. We use our advisory panel to select webinar topics that are coming up in the future. But on our website, if you have ideas, you can fill out a form and let us know what topics you're interested in and have your suggestions brought into our webinar cycle. Now, without further ado, I would like to start this webinar and give our hosts an opportunity to introduce themselves. Of course, here we have Marianne, who is on our advisory panel. She's our sectoral industry and program specialist. And we also have Kieran Bhatt, manager of class and rates. Thank you, Marianne. And Kieran.
Thank you, Tigran. My name is Kieran Bhatti, and I'm the manager for a class and rate modification program at WorkSafeBC. Today, I will talk to you a little bit about how we set insurance rates and how we classify industries, and then insurance rates for your industry, a little bit about our experience rating program, and then I'll hand it over to Marianne, and she will speak to you about some time loss claim statistics and some resources that we have available for you. Next slide, please. Next slide. So first, I just want to share some results that are related to the system as a whole, not just your industry. And then we're looking at 2023 results and how they impact 2025 rates. So the key message on this slide is that the average base rate for the whole system has been established at 1.55%. And this has been the case since 2018, meaning the average base insurance rate has remained flat since 2018. And it is lower than the average total cost rate of providing coverage, which is projected to be at 1.78%. The reason we're looking at 2023 results when we're talking about 2025 rates is because when we do the rate setting activity for 2025 rates, that happens in 2024. And at that time, we only have the full year data of 2023 and not of 2024. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you the historical perspective in regards to our 2025 average premium rates, and it provides our rates, our costs, and our administration cost over the last 20+ year. So the story told by the green line for the average base rate is that it has been consistently below the blue average cost rate line since 2007. Indicating that a history of favorable investment returns has kept rates below the cost to run the system since that time. And again, I just want to point out that we're still talking about the system as a whole and not just your industry. And then we did see, for the overall system, we did see a recent uptick in total cost to 2015 levels starting in 2021. This appears to be running flat for the time being, but it is a major consideration in the rates. And when we consider the data that we're observing concerning complex injury claims, the potential for future cost rate increases remains a significant possibility. But for now, the good news is that the 2025 average rate will continue to remain flat at 1.55%. And the last message is from this slide is regarding the red line at the bottom of the graph, which shows our administration cost, and it has remained consistently flat for the 20+ years, playing no role in the changes to the base rate shown above. So if your industry is facing a rate increase or even a rate decrease, I want to assure you that our administration cost does not play a part in that rate change. Next slide, please. So now let's talk a little bit about how our rate group structure works and how we set our insurance rates. So the starting point is an industry's classification unit, shown here as a golden block at the bottom of this image. Firms are placed together with peers and competitors into those industry classification units. Most industries, though, are not large enough for us to calculate insurance rates credibly, so they're gathered into one of our 235 industry groups. 35 industry groups, such as those for forestry, general retail, and hospitals, are large enough to become independent rate groups. The rest are placed into the rate group band that matches their claim cost rate, and the scale on the right-hand side of this slide shows you the range for each of the 20 bands. So together, the 35 industry-specific rate groups and 20 rate group bands represent the 55 rate groups used to set base rates. Today, we'll be talking about 3 classification units out of the approximately 515 that we have and related to your industry. So 2 out of the 3 have their own rate groups, and 1 is part of the a rate group band, and there will be more details on that later in my presentation. And in terms of the rate setting, that would be it if nothing changed ever. However, all industries evolve over time and not at the same pace or in the same way. So each year we review the industry groups in each rate group to make sure they continue to share similar claim costs. And those with higher claim costs move to higher rate group bands with higher insurance rates. This ensures that industry base rates are commensurate with their risk and over time cover their costs to the system. Higher industry rates also help employers become more aware of the cost of injuries in their industry and prompt interest around how those injuries can be prevented. And of course, those with lower lower costs are moved to lower risk rate groups with lower insurance rates. Next slide, please. So this flow chart shows a little bit more detail of how rate and classification and rate setting works. So we look at BC's economy as a whole, and then we divide the economy into 7 sectors, and then those 7 sectors are subsequently divided into 24 subsectors. And each subsector has a set of classification units in it. And then based on the costs of the classification units and based on an expectation of similar business undertaking, we grouped to get them together in industry groups. And then industry groups are what form rate groups, which is what we use to calculate premiums, and premiums is how we keep the accident fund funded. Next slide, please. So WorkSafeBC represents the entirety of BC's economy across 7 large industrial sectors and 24 subsectors. And your industry is in the service sector. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this slide just shows the rates for all of the classification units in health care and social assistance subsector. Next slide. And then this slide shows us the chart for, again, this is not for the 3 specific classification units that we are focusing on here today, but for overall healthcare and social assistance subsector. But we do see that both charge rate and cost rate have been seeing an increasing trend in the past few years. Next slide. So the first classification unit we're going to focus on today is counseling and social services. Counseling and social services is in rate group JA, and it represents almost 80% of the rate group's payroll and claim costs. The other 2 classification units that form this industry and rate group are funeral services and alcohol or drug treatment. But again, counseling and social services classification unit is the majority contributor to both payroll and claim costs. Next slide. So this slide shows us the recent trend in in the cost rate and charge rate for this classification unit. So we see that both are increasing. The difference between the cost rate and the charge rate is usually explained by rate group balances, which is a surplus or deficit. This industry is in a deficit position, which leads us to charging a rate that's slightly higher than what the cost to the system is. And the next slide, please, shows us the cost components. So on the left-hand side, we have the cost components for rate group, and all of these components are per $100 of payroll, and they show us the cost that we must collect to cover the cost of your industry to the system. So as we can see that the costs from 2024 to 2025 have increased, with the cost rate being 2.13% in 2025 as compared to 1.97% in 2024. And then when we move to the right-hand side, it shows us the amortization adjustment. We do see that your industry is in a deficit position, but that deficit has decreased from 2024 to 2025. And then all of these components are what lead to your industry's base rate being at 2.62%. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the residential and social service facility classification unit. This classification unit is the only classification unit in rate group IEH and represents 100% of the claim costs and payroll. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows us the trend of cost rate and charge rate. Cost rate and charge rate both continue to increase. Like in 2023 and 2024, the 2025 rate increase has been capped at 20%, and a further increase can be expected by the industry in 2026. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows us again the cost components that feed into what your industry's base rate is. We can again see that the costs that go into, from the left hand side on the slide, we can see that the total cost rate is higher than that in 2024. And then moving on to the right hand side, we see that the deficit has decreased, but due to increased costs, the rate is still increasing. And I mentioned about the 20% capping. So just under where it says actuarial rate, you'll see funding policy adjustment cost component. And you will see for 2024, there is a component for negative 1.56%. And this year it's negative 0.96%. So this is what we refer to when we see when we say that we cap the rate at 20% increase, because your industry's rate needs to be higher than what we are able to charge you. And we typically don't increase rates for any industry more than 20% from one year to the next to provide somewhat stable rates. So your industry's rate increase has been capped, and the rate is being capped down by almost $1, leading to the base rate of 5.70. So the remainder of the rate increase, which we see as negative 0.96, can be expected next year. Next slide, please. And lastly, life and job skills training. This classification unit is in rate group 9. Since it's not large enough for it to be its own rate group, it is placed with other industries with similar costs in rate group 9. And to review the membership of this rate group, you can visit this link. And it's in industry group A053. Next slide, please. So life and job skill training was moved from rate group 7 to rate group 9 in 2022 after being identified as a high costing outlier, and rate increase was limited to 20%. For 2025, rate group 9's cost has decreased after a slight increase in 2024. And this classification unit is seeing its rate decrease slightly as well accordingly. Next slide, please. And as we can see here, that the total cost rate on the left-hand side is slightly lower than what it was in 2024. And also that for the amortization adjustment component on the right-hand side, we can see that it was this classification unit was in a slight deficit position for 2024, but is in a surplus position, and we can see the surplus is reducing the rate by 0.13%, leading to the charge base rate being 1.85%. Next slide, please. Now let's talk a little bit about experience rating program. So far we've spoken about your industry's base rates, but base rate is just the starting point for the premium that each company pays. WorkSafeBC's experience rating program examines the claim cost performance of each firm and awards as much as a 50% discount off of the base rate, or applies up to 100% surcharge over time. Firms whose claim costs are same as those of similar sized firms in their industry are considered average and pay the industry's base premium rate. Best performing firms can qualify for up to 50% discount off of their base rate, and worst performing firms may be charged up to 100% surcharge. Next slide, please. So in terms of how experience rating works, we look at your claim costs for the past 3 years, and we consider the size of your firm in terms of payroll. We then compare your claim costs per dollar of payroll to the average of your industry's rate group. And again, if your firm has lower than average claim costs compared to similar size firms in your industry, you'll receive a higher experience rating discount. And if your firm has higher than average claim costs, you'll receive an experience rating surcharge. Next slide, please. So to look at an example of how experience rating may work, in an industry with a base rate of approximately 2%, sorry, I just saw the message in the chat, and I will slow down a bit, and then I can take any questions and go back to any material that you have any questions about as well. So again, in terms of experience rating, if we look at an employer with a base rate of about 2% and a payroll of about 100,000, they would pay on average $2,000, but they could pay as little as $1,000 or as much as $4,000, depending on their safety record over time. So this concludes my presentation, and I'll hand it over to Marianne, and then we can take any questions that you may have at the end of the session.
All right. So my part of the presentation is specifically around time loss claim statistics. So the time loss injury claims rate by your classification units. So Kieran went through the 3 classification units that we were looking at. Counseling or social services is represented by the orange line. The green line is residential or social service facility, and the blue is life and job skills training. The black dotted line is the average time loss claims injury rate for the entire province. So you can see the counseling or social services is slightly below that line, and then the other 2 classification units are above the average for the province. So the claims cost paid per CU. So when we're looking at how much it costs in claims amounts, the orange line again is counseling or social services. You can see that unfortunately it is rising over time. Job and life skills training has remained relatively flat. And then when we look at residential or social services, the claims costs have risen quite dramatically. So for the time period between 2019, sorry, I just need to move something on my screen so I can see. There we go. The time loss claims have more than doubled for 07 it's 766007 and 766010. The increase is difficult to see, and that's the blue line. But the costs have increased 58% from 1.2 million in 2019 to 1.9 million in 2023. And for 766017, the time loss claims for the CU was 9.5 million in 2019, and in 2023 it's almost 20.7 million. So it's increased more than 117%. So those are some pretty significant increases in the costs. So for counseling and social services, very specifically, the CU is 766007. This is a representation of both time loss claims counts as well as claims costs paid. This is for 2019 to 2023. So these are the 5 years where we have the full years of data. So on the left-hand side, for just under 3,000 time loss claims counts, you can see it's 2,911. Falls on same level with 17% of those counts. And then if you look at the right-hand side, the costs for those were only 10%. So even though there's more of them happening, the costs are not as, it's not costing you as much for those. Whereas acts of violence on the left-hand side for counts is 19%, but it's costing 37% of the overall total for those particular claims. There's some other things that don't line up exactly. So you'll see that motor vehicle incidents doesn't appear in the top 5 of your claims counts, and yet it is in the top costs. And exposure to toxic substances, which is the pink pie over on the left-hand side, that is where you'll find some of the COVID-19 claims. And you don't see that in the top 5 claims costs paid. So even though there was a high count for them, the costs for it was relatively low, so it didn't make the top 5. All right. The other one that I want to point out for nature of injury is there's 42.9% of the costs from mental disorder claims. They're followed by other strains at 22. No, that's the wrong. Sorry, I apologize. That's the wrong information for this slide. It goes on a different one. Let me go to the next slide. So our top 5 occupations, again, in that same classification unit. So this is counseling or social services. So who is getting injured? Unfortunately, it may not come as a surprise. 54% are social and community service workers that are experiencing the claims. Next comes early childhood educators and assistants, and then the rest of them are quite low, and you can see those proportions in this particular pie chart. So again, that's for all of the claims received in the 2019 to 2023 5-year range. So life and job skills training. So our next CU is 766010. The top 5 accident types. So when we look at counts and compare them to costs, so again, counts are on the left-hand side. So fewer total claims in this particular CU, so 558. Again, falls on same level is one of the highest per count, so it's at 15%, and it's only 12% of the claims cost. Acts of violence is 23%, and the cost for those is 39% in total. Overexertion is, again, you can see on counts 22%, and then only 16 in the costs, which means that there's a higher count there, but it's not costing you as much. The pink piece of pie, which is the exposure to toxic substances, as I mentioned on the previous slide, that is where you find your exposure to toxic substances. That's where you'll find COVID-19. That's where it gets classed by us. And again, it doesn't show up in your claims cost paid paid, and same as the other classification unit for motor vehicle incidents, you do see in the top 5 that it appears in costs but not in counts. So I hope that's relatively self-explanatory. You're welcome to ask questions at the end though if you have them. Top 5 occupations for this particular CU and who's getting injured. Again, it is our social and community service workers at 74% of total counts. And our last CU, residential and social service facilities. So this is 766017. When we look at counts versus costs, we again have acts of violence as quite a large piece of the pie on the left-hand side. So it's 30%, and the costs associated with those are 45%. When we look at exposure to toxic substances, you can see that it does make the claims costs piece of pie, but it's much smaller. So we had 12% for counts and 4% for costs. When we look at other accidents, it's 7% of counts, but 19% of costs. So some, but not all psychological injury claims are in this particular accident type. So if you're wondering what that might be part of the reason why the costs are high. Usually the psychological injury claims costs are some of the highest injuries that we have in terms of costs. When we look at the occupations, the piece of pie just keeps getting bigger. Unfortunately, once again, it's our social and community service workers who are being injured the most in this particular group. And then you can see on the other side what those smaller pieces of pie are. So psychological injury claims. Every year, WorkSafeBC publishes a backgrounder. It's called a media backgrounder. Sorry, I need to move something on my screen again. And it's on mental disorder claims. It's called psychological disorder claims. It was previously called mental disorder claims. So 5 years of data is provided now, and it includes breakdowns by industry and occupation. So not all the claims registered receive an allow or a disallow decision. Some of the claims are suspended and do not proceed through the decision-making process. This happens after the claims are registered, and it's often a choice of the workers. They make not to proceed with the requirements of the claim injury process. It includes obtaining a diagnosis from a psychologist or psychiatrist. Suspending claims may proceed at a future point and receive an allow or disallow decision. So you might see sometimes year by year, the media background numbers might change slightly because of those particular allow and disallow decisions. So for your information, I have highlighted residential social services facility in blue and counseling or social services in orange. They make up enough claims that it is actually comes onto our media backgrounder. Oh dear, I'm so sorry, I've moved this to the wrong place. There we go. So psychological injury only claims again. This is a 5-year summary. It's listing occupations with more than 20 psychological injury only claims accepted in 2023. And again, you can see our social and community service workers. Unfortunately, the numbers are rising within the claims that are being submitted, which means that our workers are being injured psychologically. So we do see an increase over time, and you can see that the reported versus the allowed, all of those are increasing. So even though we have more reported, we also have more allowed as well. We also have physical with psychological injury claims. So this 5-year summary, again, it's based on 5 years of data, and residential social services facility and counseling or social services have both made more than 20 claims, which is why they appear in these charts. And so we had a physical injury with psychological injury claims, and you can see those numbers there. And they were a little bit higher for residential social services facilities in 2022, lower in 2023 so far. So what is the main message we'd like to give you with all of this information is that WorkSafeBC does have some resources for you to help you with this. If you're interested in any of this data, it is all publicly available. We have 2 separate places where you can find it. You can see a screenshot. It's on the left. The leftmost screenshot is where you can find some of your industry health and safety data. And we also have a healthcare specific page where you can filter and select for each CU, and you can also filter by injury type, work days lost, and those sorts of things. So if you're interested in any of this data that comes in the chart forms, we're welcome to help you I'm happy to help you work through that if you'd like to be able to find some of this information. We also have the Employer Health and Safety Toolkit, so you can know your very specific health and safety performance. So it's data specific to you. You need to have an administrative password in order to sign in for your company. The Health and Safety Planning Toolkit, it gives you easy access to your company's data to see the injuries and claims that drive your costs. It has various drill down features to enable you to take action. It shows how improving your health and safety performance will impact your assessment rates, and you can see how you compare to your peers. So over time, you can see what you're looking like. There's also a video overview of this powerful application that's available on our website at WorkSafeBC.com. You can sign up to use it through your online account and get access to your data. And it's targeted to larger employees with 5 claims or more per calendar year. That's where you find it most effective because it does sort all of the data. These are other screenshots of the employer's health and safety planning toolkit. So it can show you some of your injuries. It can show you the largest trending rates. Very helpful tool. If you have any questions on how to use this, you're welcome to reach out. And the other online resources that we have, you're welcome to sign up and receive ongoing notifications. So we provide e-news, which will let you know if we have any upcoming regulation changes. But on our website, we also have video resources, books, bulletins, info sheets, toolbox talks, many, many things. So if you're looking for something, please go there. Just bear in mind that our search engine within our website is a tagged system in the background. Google uses an algorithm. So if you're having trouble trying to find something on our website itself, if you go to Google and then type in what you're looking for and WorkSafeBC, it can help you find it if for some reason you're having trouble within our main website. I'd also like to mention the Certificate of Recognition, or the CORE program. Some of you may already be familiar with it. If you're not, the Certificate of Recognition program is a voluntary program that recognizes employers that are proactive about improving workplace safety. So while the program is optional in some industries, it has become a requirement for contract award. This is not a WorkSafeBC policy, but an industry practice. So the program has 2 basic components for CORE. So first, employers implement an occupational health and safety management system, and the system is audited to WorkSafeBC standards. And if the employer meets these standards, they're awarded a certificate of recognition. The second part is employers with a CORE are eligible to receive financial incentives. So if you receive your CORE certification, so you pass your audit, you can get a decrease on some of your claims premiums. So employers that join the program have the benefit of a safer and healthier workforce and a work environment. It may also offer competitive advantage, such as making it easier to attract and hire workers, as well as keep workers. And there are a number of positive financial impacts, such as improvement in your company's experience rating from few worker injuries, as well as financial incentives for employers whose health and safety management systems have passed an audit and are in good standing with WorkSafeBC. So that's why I alluded to them. Lastly, we have health and safety associations. So I'm very happy to work with the Community Social Services Health and Safety Association of BC. We have 13 health and safety associations within BC. They are funded from premiums, and if you pay a levy, you are a member. Many of these health and safety associations have free resources. Of course, our CSSHSA is working on many resources. Their website is up and running, and if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you go and take a look at it. There's a number of webinars that have been recorded already and are there for you to look at. And there's many other resources that are upcoming. Here is your chance for questions. So it might be easiest if you want to ask a question to come on camera and unmute yourself. Otherwise, I will go to the chat. I'm just going to stop sharing and then find the chat. Any questions? There is also a recording of this if you would like to see it again. It will come up on the CSSHSA website relatively soon. It takes a little bit for it to render. Go there.
There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If you click on that, you can ask any questions. We'll be able to see them there. So please go ahead and do that if you like. And there's also a survey that's going to be at the end of the webinar that you can hopefully fill out for us with some valuable information.
So there is a question in the chat box. It says, for an employer with multiple locations, services, and CUs, is there a place where we can go to confirm what sites are in what CUs? Thanks. Kieran, do you know if there's a...
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Usually it wouldn't be that different sites would be in different CUs. It's if they have distinct operations, then they would be in different CUs. So I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Maybe can you rephrase?
Yeah, generally I would confirm with Karen. Yeah, there's no sort of like really link there between locations and CUs that you can go somewhere and access that type of information. As an employer, you have different types of services and programs that you provide. Those services are then linked by WorkSafeBC into different CUs. But it's not like a easy distinction always that you can tell. And sometimes that information, even in the background, has to be cleaned up a little bit and organized in a certain fashion. And so so I can see you have over 20 sites split between 2 CUs. I would like to confirm what ones fall into what CU. Karen, I'm just wondering, is there someone from WorkSafeBC that you can contact to find this information easier?
Yes, you can connect with our employer service center, Natalie, and they will be able to help you. Normally, classification units are related to business undertaking. So I'm assuming since you have 2 classification units, you have 2 distinct business undertakings. So it will depend on what services are being provided on which sites. And for us to be able to determine which the classification units apply. But you can reach out to our employer service center and they should be able to help you specifically with your question regarding your let me check what is the number for employer service center. Sorry, I don't have that handy.
We can share it after this call too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be great. I can share it with you by then.
Are there any other questions that anyone wants to put either in the Q&A or in the chat? Or unmute, come on camera.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing the Employer Service Center phone number and details.
The Employer Service Center number is 604-244-6181 or toll free at 888-922-2768.
So I know we went through a lot of information. Again, there will be a recording available. You are welcome to reach out if you have questions. I am happy to help you look at the website that we have and your employer data. I unfortunately don't have access to your employer health and safety toolkit. You have to sign in for that one. So I'm sorry, I can't assist you with that one, but any of the publicly available data, I can certainly help you with.
And we are also available here at the Health and Safety Association. We can meet with you and sit down and review your employer toolkit. We're also available to do a gap analysis on your health and safety program and help you prepare for CORE. If you're interested in applying for CORE, you can reach to us via our email, healthsafety@csshsa.com, I think. No, .ca, sorry. And you can also reach out via website. We have a couple of forms you can fill out to kind of contact us. So we'll be glad to give you more information if you need it. And we just had one more question come through. I was just wondering, as I looked into the employer's toolkit under the acts of violence and wondered if you have any information on what that usually entails, as I saw a few psychological claims, for example, of staff finding deceased people under the acts of violence. Marianne, do you want to answer that question?
I'm just looking to see if we have any information on what usually entails. So if you're looking for definitions specifically within one of our tools that's on the website, we have all of the definitions posted for nature of injury and those sorts of things. So what falls under certain claims codes. Just being mindful that it's an inexact science because we're dealing with humans and human nature, but we have to put things in certain categories. So you will find a nature of injury and the mechanism of injury and those sorts of things. So we're limited to the boxes that we can code things under. So sometimes, even though seeing a deceased person does not seem like an act of violence, somehow in our system, that is the only box that it is applicable to. I'm not sure if that answers your question. And again, we do have definitions on our website for all of those claims coding.
Yeah, most recently, we also conducted a psychological environmental scan and had conversations with a number of organizations in the sector, with managers as well as frontline staff. And so we will be sharing those recommendations that are coming out from the report, likely in the near future, first with our board, and then likely with the sector in January. And we're going to dive deeper into the psychological injuries and what recommendations we have for the sector to reduce some of those claims and costs associated with that type of injury.
We have one more question. So it says, would be curious to hear any insights from you on how the presumption clause introduced earlier this year may impact the claims costs associated with psychological injuries over the next several years. Kieran, do you want to speak to this, or would you like?
Well, insurance rates are based on historical data, versus, and we use that to try to project what happens in the future years, and that's how we usually do base rates, or insurance rates. But in terms of the presumption clause for psychological injuries, if there's anything that's gonna increase the claim costs, then that will usually have an impact on the base rates by increasing the base rates. It depends on how many such claims that we get, or and obviously on all of the other moving parts that are there, such as if there's any reduction in costs in any other area, things like that. But a general rule of thumb is that if costs increase, then rates increase, but we cannot say for certain at this point, because again, for example, the 2025 rates are based on data up to 2023, and so for 2026 rates will be based on data up to 2024, and so on.
What I would want to add to that, Kieran, is that yes, the presumptive clause was introduced this year, of course, and some of the occupations now are part of the social services sector. But those type of claims have been approved and allowed for a number of years now, ever since sort of that regulatory changes came into effect. What the presumptive clause really allows now is for these employees who are making that type of claim to get access to services faster. So really what this is meant to do is allow some of the access to healthcare services, let's say a psychologist or psychiatrist, to be more readily available to those frontline workers. And really, we don't necessarily anticipate that this presumptive clause will really make a difference, but really it should decrease some of the claim duration. But we still have challenges in terms of the number of claims that are coming up as a result of a lot of the trauma that some of these workers are experiencing on their jobs. So I think there's a larger discussion that we as a sector need to have in order to figure out what we need to do in this sector to mitigate some of the challenges that we see regarding the psychological injuries. Okay. All right. I guess if we do not have any further questions, I just want to thank you to our presenter. I want to thank you. Sorry, I just saw. I don't know why it's here. Thank you, Anna. Marianne and Karen, I want to thank you both for presenting today at our webinars on rates. I really appreciate your time and making it specific to our sector. I want to thank Anna for helping us organize this as well. And I want to thank all of the attendees for being part of this, and hope that in the future we can have more specific ones in terms of the solutions that we're looking at, and have a broader discussion with our sector on how we can, as a group, mitigate some of these claim durations and the incidents that we see in this sector. So there's a lot of exciting things coming your way from our association, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Tigran. Bye-bye.